in my view, data transparency, data use, open data, open government, the upsides outweigh those potential issues.
And good morning or good afternoon, wherever you might be. I know that we have registrations from all over the country and all over the world joining us here. It is the top of the hour, 10 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. I'm Pete Peterson, the very grateful Dean of Pepperdine's Graduate School of Public Policy, and I'm coming to you live here from the Dean's Conference Room here on our Malibu, California campus, and delighted to be joined by my friend, Dr. Jonathan Reichental, for today's first part of a two-part webinar conversation, Smart Cities for Dummies, and it's based on Jonathan's new book, which is just out in the last month. It's already a bestseller. I show it to you here. It's available at Amazon or wherever books are sold. The format for today's conversation is our standard webinar format here at the Graduate Policy School. We're going to begin with about a 45-minute conversation between Jonathan and me, talking about his book and his incredible experience both in government and in the private sector, really across sectors, in promoting and building smart cities and smart communities. After that, we'll welcome your questions to engage in a conversation with you all. I know that we have a number of folks currently working in city government that have registered for this, and so questions can be submitted through the chat feature, which you'll find down at the bottom of your screen. Simply type your question in, and we'll get to those in the last 15 minutes. Please feel free to enter questions in throughout our initial conversation, and again, we'll be getting to those in the last 15 minutes. Again, I am the Dean here of Pepperdine's Graduate School of Public Policy, and one of the areas of study and also training and education that we take very seriously here is the use of technology to make our city governments more responsive and transparent. It's a revolution, really, in many ways, one that's been led by Jonathan, which is why I'm so excited to welcome him here to talk about his important new book. A little bit of background on Jonathan for the few of you who don't know him. Dr. Jonathan Reichental is the CEO of Human Future, a global business and tech education advisory and investment firm. He's the former Chief Information Officer for the city of Palo Alto, which is where I first got to know him, introduced by Jim Keene, the former city manager there, and still an advisor here to our Davenport Institute for Public Engagement based at the Policy School. He's a multiple award-winning tech leader and has 30 years of experience, which again, I think is so interesting that his experience has spanned both the private sector as well as the public sector. In 2017, he was named one of the top 100 CIOs in the world. And in 2016, he was named a top influential CIO in the United States. His innovative work in government has also been recognized by the White House, and he's consulted with a number of cities and state governments in the promotion and development of smart cities, both in culture and technology. He is a popular writer and online host, producing a number of highly successful online courses through the LinkedIn Learning platform. He is the co-author of the Apps Challenge Playbook and the new book that is just out from Norton, Smart Cities for Dummies, which we will be discussing today. And so with that, I'll stop my screen share and very excited to welcome in you, Jonathan Reichental. Jonathan, great to be with you.
No, it's my pleasure. I love working with you, and I'm a big fan of the School of Public Policy there at Pepperdine University.
Well, let's get started. I wanted to break up this conversation into three sections. First, And these sections really follow the different sections of your book. And they always say in talking about books and promoting them, you should mention the title at least 7 times in an interview, Jonathan. So this is Smart Cities for Dummies, I will say again. And but I think what's so refreshing and interesting about this book is that it's not just a book for techies, right? I think what you've done really so well in writing this book is you've discussed smart cities as a concept, one that has historical resonance that goes back millennia. You've discussed it as a leadership skill and the fact that it's not just about the technology. It takes a certain type of leader that can take technology and put it to the best use for the common good in the communities in which they're serving. But there is technology as well. And so I wanted to break up the conversation in those three buckets. First, to think about smart cities as a concept. While many of us are newly introduced to the term, think it's just something recent, I think what you do in a very compelling way in the book is that you ground it really as a concept in one that has been applied by cities for going back centuries and millennia. Then look at smart cities as a leadership skill and talk more specifically, especially about your amazing work for the city of Palo Alto. And I'll talk a little bit about my own experience in getting to know you and just the transformation that you wrought there. Because I think it is a story that is worth not only knowing about, but as one that really can be adapted in wherever anyone is working. And then get to the discussion around technologies and just highlight, you cover an array of different technologies that cities are using to make their governments more responsive and transparent. But I just wanted to highlight 3, and then we'll get to other questions. So first, Jonathan, tell us a little bit about smart cities as a concept. Define it as you will in terms that you think are helpful, but also talk about the fact that that concept is really one that goes back to ancient Greece and Rome, as you talk about in the book. It really is a story about how we live together in cities.
Yeah, thank you so much for that great intro, and I'm looking forward to the conversation today. You know, often, terms have certain meanings to people. I say in the book often, don't get too worried about the title "Smart Cities." This is a book, and this is a domain about our future. It's really about the future of people. And in fact, in the first sentence of the book is, this is a book about people. And I think it's surprising because so many people, their assumption is this is just about technology. This is just about the Internet of Things or data, or apps. That's a part of it for sure. Let's acknowledge that. But it's a much bigger topic. When I was starting to write the book and I had the layout, how I was going to address the issues, I was talking to my editor, and he'd read my sort of first pass at the first chapter where I'm talking about the history of cities, and he said, Dummies books, we don't typically do that. We like to just get into the substance straight away. And I said, no, it's really important, I think, to bring people way back to almost the beginning of civilization, when humans were starting to organize, because it kind of tells us how we got to today, really, and helps us know where we're going. And I think that's so important for just people who are interested in the space, but also practitioners, people who actually want to build better communities. So yeah, there's a section about urban innovation, and I think people might think I'm going to just talk about Silicon Valley and about an app or an application, right, on the web. In fact, I talk about aqueducts, right? Yeah. You think about the first major urban areas. Remember a few thousand years ago, there weren't that many humans on the planet. The phenomena of 7 billion people in megacities is very new. So people were in groups of hundreds. In the biggest cities, they were in thousands. So these places weren't huge. But as more and more people sort of organized themselves, they needed more water, and they had to transport water. And that's not an easy task. When we were wanderers, we just kind of walked to the water, found some mechanism to carry it back, and that's how we dealt with it. But now you've got to be able to have drinking water and bathing, and those types of things. You've got to be able to transport it. So the aqueduct system is, starting about 8,000 years ago, later perfected by the Romans, is an amazing achievement. First of all, they could move water long distances, but even more remarkably, they could move water upwards. Think about that.
Yeah.
So much of water moves by gravity, but there's places where you have to surmount a higher elevation. So they figured that out too. And what's lovely is particularly in Europe, as you travel around Europe, you can see many of these aqueducts. They've stood the test of time, thousands of years. But let's fast forward. You get to Florence in Italy. I usually start there with some of my other lectures and stories. That's where you have we're in the 1300s, and it's the birthplace of it's the Renaissance, the birthplace of critical thinking and banking and art, and that's where you really start to see major leaps in how humans organize, in really good governance. Now, yes, sure, the Romans, the Greeks, and Babylonians and others, and the Syrians, they all had systems, but we were learning and we were building upon it. And you get to, Florence, a beautiful city, by the way, in Italy. And here you have sophisticated trading. It's an intersection of East and West. And it really is where humans begin to enter the modern era and the emergence of modern cities. So when we talk about smart cities, what we're really talking about is being able to have urban environments. First and foremost, always about people, go back to people that insist on a good quality of life. That quality of life is central to our efforts. And, as we enter the 21st century now, well, we're entering the third decade. What we see is complexity. We see aging infrastructure. We see major challenges like the climate emergency, or dense traffic and congestion. In many places, the water isn't great, the air isn't great. We have significant challenges. So when we talk about the future of cities and we use the term smart cities, what can we do differently? How can we think differently? Bring innovation to the table, new ideas, bold ideas, take some risks to make our cities function better. No doubt, like with everything else, technology is going to play a very big part in that.
I think that segues nicely into the second part, because again, we haven't gotten to the tech yet. And I think, again, what's so important about the way that you frame this book is, first, you situate smart cities as a concept, and one that we've seen in practice throughout human history. But then at various points, you weave through this story, and you definitely hit on it at the end when we get to the part of TENS, and we look at the different aspects related to what are the aspects that promote smart cities, what are the ones that can inhibit it. This issue of leadership skills. And so I have to raise a story about when you and I first met, because to me, you've taught me so much about this revolution, frankly, that again is not just one about technology, it's one about culture, and cultures within government, but also cultures within the communities in which we're working. And so we must have met, I don't know, 7-8 years ago. Jim Keene was the city manager of Palo Alto. He said, "You've got to meet my new CIO. Great guy. Just came to us from working in the private sector and covering government technology and working in that space. And I think you'll enjoy meeting him." And we had a meeting at 5 o'clock, I remember, in your offices in that large cube building, which is City Hall right in downtown Palo Alto. And I remember seeing you at your desk, and you kind of had your head in your hands. And I said, hi, I'm Pete Peterson. We had a meeting, and we said, yeah, good to meet you. And I had to ask, is everything okay? And you said, I really thought we were going to build the city as a platform here, but I'm trying to wrestle with the fact that our phone system doesn't work. And I remember that moment because, 5, 6 years on, I come to meet you again at the city of Palo Alto in the new offices there for the IT department. And it felt like I was stepping into an internet startup that could be anywhere else in that town, right? The capital, Silicon Valley, right? Palo Alto. And I remember you saying in that first meeting, you said, Facebook may be across the street, but it feels like it's a million miles away. This was when Facebook actually had their headquarters in downtown Palo Alto. And so I wanted to look at this issue of the transformation you helped lead at in Palo Alto. And even for a city that is so well known for its tech, as really being the birthplace in many ways of Silicon Valley. When you got inside City Hall, it was a very different environment. And so I'm hoping you could tell us about your initial experiences there and what you saw, and then the gradual process of not just bringing in new technology and apps and all the rest of that stuff, but preparing the ground and a culture that would sustain and support it.
You have an amazing memory. That's so cool. I love it. Yeah, I mean, there's so many aspects to this. I'll try to kind of hit some high points based on what you asked. I was intrigued by the opportunity. An executive recruiter came to me. I wasn't considering going to the public sector or leading a city from the technology perspective. And I just found it really interesting. I found the potential for, as you said, the birthplace of Silicon Valley to be an interesting place to experiment, to see what's possible. And, that's my background. Innovation is my background, and being, taking risks and bold steps in organizations as being characteristic of my career. And sort of, I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to sort of think about the possibilities of delivering a city differently? And now I've got the whole of the Silicon Valley ecosystem to tap into. Yeah. It was a big experiment. That was the thesis. Could that make a difference? Could it be done? One of the sort of earliest sort of little jokes that Jim Keane, the city manager, and I share often is, we say, I took a risk on the city took a risk on me. We didn't know if it would work. Yeah. And well, the rest is history, of course. Surprisingly, it worked very well. But I want to quickly talk about the telephone system, because I think that is a wonderful, maybe just a metaphor for this whole space, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I joined the city, and yes, as you quite rightly point out, I was ambitious. I wanted to get very quickly into the potential for establishing a digital platform, being cloud first, mobile first. And, I definitely saw the potential. I loved the team that I was going to work with. And I was thrilled to be working with Jim and some of his colleagues too in the leadership team. So everything was in the right place. And very quickly I learned that there was an old telephone system. In fact, I love this. There was one executive, I think he was a deputy city manager. We went, group of us went for something to eat after work in my first few weeks. And he said, Jonathan, just want to talk about the telephone system. He said, my phone doesn't have an 8 anymore on the dial. So when I have to dial a number that is an 8, I shout out of my office for my assistant to dial the number and then transfer it to me. And I said to him, I'm going to get you a new phone tomorrow. I think we have phones in storage. And he kind of smiled and said, yeah. He said, I've been promised a new phone for years. And nobody's come through. And when he came into work the next morning at 8 a.m., a new phone was on his desk, and it had all the keys. And firstly, he from then on, he respected me, because I said I would do it and I did it. And I think that's a leadership skill.
Mm.
But the fact that we had an analog telephone system that, was in bad shape, that the project to replace it with a voice over IP system was stalled, was all characteristic of some challenges that I really had to get my teeth into. So I say, let's make this a priority. It was my belief that if I could get that project done and completed well, that I could establish credentials to do other things, that I would be given the space and the support to do more ambitious things if I could get the basics really well done. So I remember I was at one of our leadership team meetings early in that year, maybe it was 2012. And I brought in one of the models of the new phones. Maybe it was like April of that year. And I passed it around to all the directors, the public works director, the library director, et cetera. And then it came back to me. I said, I'm in the process of leading and making this a priority that we will have a new telephone system. And I said, by the end of this year, everybody will have a new phone on their desk. I make that commitment to you. And so that was like what it was going to be, maybe 7 months later, 8 months later, something like that. And I could see little snickers and stuff and sort of like, okay, whatever. He's new. He's the new guy. He doesn't know how this is going to work. When I left the meeting, what I didn't tell them and what I was thinking about was, I never said the telephones would be plugged in or that they would work. I simply said they will be on everybody's desk. So I gave myself a little out, a little bit of a cushion there. But getting to the end of the story, by the holidays of 2012, everybody had a brand new working phone. And then I could do interesting things. I'd established credibility. I made a commitment. I pushed the teams, both outside the city and inside the city, to deliver, just like I'd been doing in the private sector. And we got it done. And people were very, very pleased. I think that's important, by the way, when you start a leadership role, is, I've written about this, the 5 things you should do as a new leader. And one of them is, do a few little things that get results. Don't jump into the biggest brand new project that's on the list, because, by doing the small ones, people can see how you work and you can establish, again, a credibility. My vision, as you described in your question, was to have a team and an environment that reflected the community. And I do think that, by the way, for every city in the world, the needs of every city reflect the culture and specifics of that community. What's important to San Francisco is different from Malibu, is different from New York and London, Bangalore. Every city has its needs. In a moment, I think we'll talk about some consistencies, but in general, the strategy should reflect the needs of that community. So one of the funny things was one of the things I really wanted to do was get my team exposure to sort of Silicon Valley thinking and the way the community behaved, the tech community. So almost, I think every month I took, and there was about 35 people on my team, we would go and visit and spend some time with a tech company in the Valley. And we went to Microsoft, we went, and we went to some Cloudera, lots of interesting tech companies. And we would go there, and the first thing you notice, it's modern, it's bright, it's open plan, very collaborative, meeting rooms where people can just have spontaneous meetings. They were using video conferencing, just, and we they'd have little snacks, the little jelly beans and the pretzels, and then we would come back to City Hall, and we would go back into the IT area, and we'd all sort of drop our heads like, we work here, this is the opposite of what we just experienced. And I thought to I was like adamant from day one, no, we need to create a startup at City Hall. Not only do we need a startup that works like a startup, moves fast, takes risks, delivers constantly, all the characteristics of what a good startup is, but also we would look like it. We would behave like it. That was really important to me. And I started working on that pretty soon after I joined the city. Now, it takes a while to build a case, to get the funding, but I did. And we tore down the walls, we brightened it up, and it looked like a little Google, a little Facebook. Still does today. We renamed it the Civic Technology Center. And it was lovely. I love that you commented on this. When people would walk into our area, and we had half a floor on the second floor of City Hall, when people would walk in, they would, and I had my, we had a receptionist, assistant, admin there.
Yep.
They would come in, and her name is Jeannie. They would say, I'm looking for Jonathan. Is this City Hall? I mean, it was that double take. And every time that would happen, I would say, I would feel like I scored a point. It was like, it shouldn't feel like, mid 20th century government. It should look like the 21st century and be able to deliver what people want in the 21st century. So yeah, to me, this could have been done before me, could have been done by somebody else, but it did require a person with a vision. It required a person with leadership, and it required the support of the city and the community.
I would just ask anyone who can make the time or may be in the area, if you have not visited those offices in the city of Palo Alto, in the City Hall there, it is remarkable. And again, one could say, well, you just put some paint on the wall and some LED screens up on the, hanging from the ceiling, but it is representative of the broader culture that's there. And to walk in the front door of City Hall, this really kind of classic mid-century building, and then walk into that space, it really is, you really do feel like, wow, that I'm walking into a place that kind of gets what's happening outside of this, in this amazing culture that is Silicon Valley.
Let me add another, just a quick additional point to that.
Yeah.
And I know people are eager to talk about solutions and stuff. I know you're going to get us there.
Yeah.
The other aspect here is, I'll say this sensitively. When I first started hiring people, here's my quick story. When we would have an opening in my first year or year and a half at the city, we would get a small group of people. We maybe get 10 applicants, maybe 12 applicants. And when I would ask them, why do they want this job? They would say, well, I want to relax a little bit. I'm in a private company and it's a bit intense. And if I work in government, I think it's going to be a little bit more chill. And they immediately, by the way, were not the candidate I wanted. By the time I left, 7 years later, the average opening got about 200 applicants. Yeah. And so you ask, well, why is that? Well, I could never offer more money than Facebook. I think I joked that with you with that. Facebook was down the road, Google, LinkedIn, Salesforce, whoever. I could never offer money, because I said, if you want to get rich, this is the last job you should have. But if you want a opportunity with meaning, with values, that affects people's lives every single day, this is the job. And I wanted people to be proud of where they worked. So when we talk about, painting the walls and putting up LCD screens and stuff, it's a little bit of vanity for sure. Yeah. But when people feel good, when people are proud, they do great work. Yeah. And one guy was on my team. I think he'd been on my team about 25 years. And he's a little, cynical, beat up, kind of like, it's been 25 years of government. It's been tough. And I joined, I got all this enthusiasm and everything. By the way, people thought I would last 6 months and leave. They really did. I think they were betting, actually. I'm not kidding. I think that one of my managers told me a couple of years later that there was a bet going, how long would Jonathan last? And people were changing their bets all the time. Once I was there, a year and a half, 2 years, 3 years, the people knew I was sticking around. Yeah. I was making promises to people. And again, I found this very consistent in the early years, the sort of doubt people had that we could make the differences. You gotta push. But this guy, a bit cynical, but 25 years at the city, working on my team, I talked to my team about, we're going to be completely changing this environment. We're going to create a startup at City Hall. We're going to behave like a startup, and we're going to deliver solutions to our community, and we're going to do it really well at high quality. And again, he was totally like, Jonathan's crazy. He's out of his mind. And, it took us a couple of years to get the whole, Civic Technology Center into place.
Yep.
And one morning, just completely, maybe a month after everything had been completed and was in place, I get a knock on my door in my office. He comes in, sits down, and he says, Jonathan, first of all, I didn't think you would be able to achieve this. So, well done. And then he said, I got to say, I've been here 25 years and, I like my job and I like it. He says, but I come in every day now. I'm so proud. He says, I come in every day and I sit at my desk in this startup at City Hall in Palo Alto, and I just really feel good about it.
Yeah.
And that's amazing for morale, and
Yeah.
it attracts talent. And if
Yes.
we on this webinar this morning, we have a lot of government people who struggle with recruitment and getting the best and the brightest. You should get the best and the brightest and make that environment so attractive that people are begging to join your team.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it.
No, that's such a great story. It reminds me, I was privileged to get a behind the scenes tour a couple months ago, before the whole pandemic hit, of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena. And it was by one of the people who leads, is one of the senior administrators there. And he's taking a group of us through all the different areas, from the building of the Mars rover to, they got missions going to Neptune and whatever, Jupiter. And at one point he said, my engineers are getting recruited every day by the Googles and Facebooks of this world. And the only reason they stay is because they believe in the mission. And it reminds so much of what you said there. And again, we're a half hour into this conversation. We haven't even talked about blockchain. Just as to put a marker on it, we're about to. But this part, which again, Smart Cities for Dummies, you talk about in this book, is really about building cultures that can sustain and promote these principles, and building that kind of pride, especially in technology, where the plus minus between salaries in the private sector versus the public sector is so dramatic. Your ability to hold on and attract talent really it's going to be about the culture. And you obviously built that at Palo Alto. And I think across government, that's an argument that we all need to be making, is that we're the place, whether you're working at JPL or the state of California or the city of Palo Alto, we're the place that is supporting and promoting and creating an environment to build community and sustain the common good. And then it becomes how we do that. So
let me touch on that real briefly, because I think that's an important point for those that are not necessarily in IT and are thinking about this a lot. Just quick story, one of the things that I noticed in the area that I managed was there was some very old whiteboards. My stories are quite basic, but they make a big difference. And the whiteboards were so old that they were basically, they were whiteboards, right? White. They were actually dark because they were so old, and the ink was no longer coming off. The special chemical that makes it easy to wipe stuff off had already, evaporated over many years. So I said, we can't use these. I would write something on a whiteboard and I couldn't wipe it off. So I looked, go online, and we got to get some contemporary boards. And I the best you can get today, that are not electronic are the glass ones. You get these, they're nice. They're not super expensive or anything, but they're they're premium. And throughout the IT area, I put up these glass boards, and they're groundbreaking, because now they're beautiful and clean, and we can do real sessions where we're architecting and we're working through problems and stuff. So I just order these in. I got my budget for that. And it's not, it's just a few more weeks later, I start to see these glass boards show up all over the city. And every department director was hearing about what was happening in Jonathan's area, and everyone was replacing them. So that was the first sort of signal that I knew that I could influence culture. And, you know, there's example
And beyond your department. And beyond your department is what you're saying. Yeah.
yeah. Oh, yeah. In public works and
That's it.
in public safety and in utilities. Oh, yeah.
Great story. Well, let's get to, let's actually talk about technology. What the heck? Smart cities, after all. Again, in Smart Cities for Dummies, you cover an array of different technologies. I just wanted to highlight three in our next 10 to 15 minutes here. I do want to note, and this is true of the entire, if you will, Dummies series, just how well this book is laid out. I mean, it's such a great resource. Not only do you cover all the parts of the culture and history and current technologies and future of smart cities in a very easily comprehensible way, but you also cite a number of different resources that people can find on the web, organizations and associations that are working on these. So for those that want to take this as your opening platform and conversation around smart cities and then go deeper in a number of different directions, you provide all of that here. So as the Aussies would say, good on you for that. Just really, really well done. So I want to begin with IoT, the Internet of Things. You cover that. And I think what's so fascinating about that is that as much as it's discussed as being, as it is, you know, very modern technology and cutting edge in many ways, it can influence and be a part of anything from parking to water. And so talk a little bit about IoT and even in the very mundane things that government does, how it's increasingly influencing and impacting, again, all toward the end of making government more responsive and transparent.
Yeah, it's a great topic. Well, a couple of points here. One is I believe the city is the ultimate platform for the Internet of Things. I really do. I say that to vendors, say that to colleagues all the time, and I'll try to make the case for that. So the interesting thing about the Internet, you know, we're a few decades in, is that, you know, we've been connecting people. You know, we've been connecting people to machines. When you connect people, we're only about coming on about close to 60% of the planet is connected to the Internet to be able to retrieve and use information. By the way, that means we've still got a few billion to connect, you know, and we'll do that over the next few years. So we're still not a hyper connected world, although over 4 billion people are connected. And we're connecting people to machines, and machines have been connecting to machines. But the real phenomena now is when devices and machines connect to the Internet. This is when it just gets interesting. There's no upper limit on that, right? Where there's an upper limit on people, you know, we can add billions and billions and billions of devices onto the Internet to retrieve information and to send information and to process information in the environment. And this is phenomenal, you know, particularly as wireless technologies become more prolific, whether it's whether it's Wi-Fi or LoRa, Zigbee, or 5G, which is the biggie, 5G. The wireless technology becomes this incredible enabler. It means that if it's basically low cost and prolific everywhere, you can pretty much connect anything. And one of my projections for the future is we'll probably connect everything. And what that means ultimately, 15 years from now, we'll see. It's hard to project what happens when you can connect every object and be able to address that object, or that object be able to address you or send information to you or other machines. So the potential here is phenomenal, both for connecting homes, creating smart homes, in factories for creating the industrial Internet of Things, or IIoT, and now the IoT in a urban environment. Now we're also lucky because if we want to deploy these little devices connected to the Internet, let's say sensors, we have the perfect infrastructure. We have lampposts, right? Communities have lampposts almost on every street They typically are stationary, strong, and they have power, right?
Yeah.
So these are the things you need. So we're kind of lucky. We have an existing infrastructure for the most part. So you have to start thinking, well, what can we do if we can deploy any type of sensor in all over a community? And so we'll start with the basics, right? I mean, it's very important that we know the quality of air. We're in Northern California here right now. There's a lot of fires. It's kind of sad. We got our windows closed here and doors because you can smell it as we speak, and it's kind of a little bit orangey outside. So air quality matters, and even on great days when things look fabulous, it's important to know the various levels of air quality, and it matters to people with asthma and other medical conditions. Well, let's push this a little bit. Okay, so now that we have these sensors, the capability to deploy sensors, maybe we can do things like identify available parking spaces, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
It seems some of the stuff that we're trying to overcome here in the short term seems basic, but it's really important. In a downtown urban environment anywhere in the world, the statistic is up to about 30% of that dense traffic is just people looking for a parking space. Right? So you think about if I could know as I'm going on my trip, or my autonomous vehicle is taking me somewhere, it knows where to park to wait for me. That can reduce congestion, and it can speed up the time for me to arrive at a place. What about something like trash cans? Okay, let's again, this is not terribly glamorous, but when you're in cities and you're in government, you got to deal with everything, and this is important stuff. The typical sort of maybe some underfunded city may have street trash cans that are overflowing, right? They overflow, and then they're picked up when the trucks go by on their regular routes. Well, now what we have is more and more communities are connecting the trash cans to the internet. The trash cans are becoming IoT devices.
Yep.
And what this means is, firstly, it can detect what level of trash is in the trash can. So that's useful. So for example, if it's going to be spilling over the top, and that creates smell and potentially attracts rodents and things.
Yeah.
You want to be able to know that.
A bunch of public health issues that can spill off of that. Yeah.
Oh, huge.
Yeah.
Well, but there's just a much better, there's even a better advantage, which is the folks that pick up the trash, these trucks that go around a community. You don't want them driving and trying to pick up trash where it doesn't need to be picked up. That's not very efficient. So with the combination of connected trash cans, some artificial intelligence, which creates optimization for routes, now you can make sure the trash cans are always emptied, and the routes that the driver of the truck takes are the best ones, so that they don't have to be driving to places that are unnecessary.
It's just in time trash pickup.
It is.
Yeah.
You mentioned water, and let me just touch on water real quick, and then I'm interested in the other two technologies you're going to ask about. When I was writing the book, I knew I had to talk about water. Without water, there's no life, there's nothing, right? Yeah. So it is the basic fundamental of life, and cities have to provide water for not just drinking, but for lots of things. And I wanted to learn more about that. I wanted to learn about the emerging area of smart water. And of course, I write about it in the book, and a little bit of the history and some of my findings. And a lot of it for me, by the way, was a surprise. I was learning as I was writing, which was a nice benefit of the exercise as well. On average, some percentage of water is lost when it goes from source to destination. In the best communities, the best run communities with the most modern plumbing infrastructure, it's still 10, 15, 20% of water being lost. That's a tragedy. That's a tragedy in a time when clean, good drinking water is a very important resource, and sometimes a scarce resource. But if you go to some of the more developing cities in the world, some of the larger developing cities, you can see up to 70 to 90% of water being lost
Mm.
from source as it travels to your home or to your office or factory or farm. That's not good. And what the Internet of Things allows us to do is very, very cheaply monitor plumbing and be able to identify major leaks and address them. And this is game changing. This is because you think in a world pre, low cost sensors, in a world of pre connected devices, this was really hard. And in fact, close to impossible. It was sort of like it was a game of guessing, sort of an educated guessing game of where the crack was. You had to dig up a lot of areas. Now you can actually find the crack and the leak with precision, and it's enabled by this Internet of Things. And that's, can you think of, among the things that we could do in our cities and our developing cities, something more important than being able to get clean water to homes and to people? I mean, that's really critical for a smarter, more sustainable community.
You raise an interesting point there, and I'm just going to skip to the second technology here. And as I do, we have some questions coming in via the chat feature. Again, welcoming any of your questions that we're going to address here in our last 10 to 15 minutes or so. But I don't know if it's an irony, but the interesting point you make there, that some of the new technologies can actually have the greatest impact in the developing world or in developing cities, where
Yes.
Many of the other efficiencies that are built into more modern cities, certainly the IoT can still have an impact there, but an outsized impact, as you say, on issues like water and energy more broadly. I want to get to big data because that's certainly it's a revolution more broadly outside of the public sector. The private sector uses big data really in total across retail, marketing, sales. But in the public sector, we're still wrestling with the amount of data that we actually have. And I think, again, what's important about Smart Cities for Dummies is you don't just talk about the technology piece, but you also talk about the strategy and leadership that is necessary to best understand the data you have and then to use it in a way that really does inform decisions. So talk a little bit about the strategy first, and just a couple highlights of ways in which data can most efficiently and effectively be used by cities.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Again, when I was writing the book, my editor said, write the first chapter you should write in full is the one you know the most about. And so the Unleashing Data chapter in the book is the first one, because it's a topic I'm very comfortable with. We had so many great results with it. And it's one of the areas that I really spend a lot of time teaching and helping cities use to transform themselves. This may be now a cliche. Maybe someone who's attending this has a Jonathan Reichental bingo, card, and when I say this, they say, "Hey, you said it," so we'll mark it on the board. When you are in government, and particularly in cities, it is a world of constraints. There's never enough money. There's never enough talent. There's never enough time. There's too many projects, too many priorities. You're working within these remarkably tight constraints. But I noticed very early on that we had an abundance of something, and that was data. Mm-hmm. And yes, in Palo Alto, we had a lot of data, but we also had an abundance of data in every city and every government in the world. And the question was, now that we know, and Tier, you set this up really nice in the question, we've seen the amazing and important value of data in the private sector. What could we do with it in the public sector? And back in 2011, when I first started in running the IT in the city, nothing. We were doing nothing, right? and as very little. And as I looked out to communities and cities all around the world, I noticed, folks are doing very little too. And by the way, when I would attend committee meetings and council meetings and elected officials were deliberating, so often it was anecdotal, and it wasn't data driven. It wasn't based on real evidence. And sort of saying that today in 2020, it does seem a little crazy because we were so much better at it. But again, in my research and analysis, we have a long way to go. Data is that thing you have a lot of, you already have it. So there's no additional cost here. What you need to have in your community and in your city hall organization is talent. You need to understand how to leverage the value of that data for better decision-making, for better projects, better collaboration, for better trust and transparency. Because, when communities have access to data that's at City Hall, that's untarnished, as in they can see it the same way as any staff member can, that builds trust. And with trust, you can get stuff done, right? There's already, as we know, a tension between communities and government. Let's do everything we can to reduce that. So the communities that are using data well are, for example, delivering better services, right? Where people have a better understanding of the permitting process. They are using crime data in a way that people can understand patterns of crime and make all sorts of, lifetime decisions. And councils and elected officials are using more data to make day-to-day decision-making. And I think that's the core of it. The final little nice one is, and I did a lot of this in Palo Alto, is if you make city data easily accessible and consumable by anyone, the stuff that's not regulated or private, companies will build products around it. And you can now from that generate economic activity in your community, and I saw that happen. A company can build a business based on city data. It could be any number of things. Starts to hire people, starts to pay taxes, starts to, generate economic value. So data is not just kind of an interesting thing for decision making. It's also the source of economic expansion in your community.
I remember at one point, and again, this was in one of our first meetings, you telling the story of, and I've told this story 100 times, of how the city didn't know the analytics of its website. And you were doing a website redesign for the city of Palo Alto. And so the first question is not how do we make our website look good, but how do we make it useful? And you ran the analytics on the website, and you found that where most residents from Palo Alto were looking at the website were the hours for the library. And you had to go through about 3 or 4 steps to get to that in the original website. And so, again, it seems like such a simple thing, but these are the things that can be really frustrating. You put that on the homepage of the website when you went through the redesign. But I think that's also, as you referenced many times, these are metaphors for other things. And I'm as much work as I do with cities, I do sometimes ask, do you know the email list that you have for your residents? And do you know the analytics for your website? And even those kind of simple points of contact that a city can have with its residents, they still don't have that, Mm-hmm. I want to take in some questions. We've got a very interesting one I want to touch on from Noor, who raises this interesting point. I'll just read the question as it's posed. Will smart cities bring us back to the pre-first industrial revolution in Britain, in which the 17th century, living a more close and friendly communities where cities will be more self-sufficient in energy and products and services, will be localized by using more advanced technologies? Are we going to come full circle with these little shires positioned around that are indeed more self-sufficient? Is that kind of thing possible?
Yeah. And by the way, just to give you a flavor of who's attending today, Nur is asking that question from Romania in Eastern Europe. So we got an Eastern European attendee. It's wonderful to have him here. So first of all, part of the answer has to be, we don't know, right? Anyone who sort of has confidence in what the next, few decades are going to look at is guessing, right? One thing for sure, 2020 proves something, the future isn't a straight line, right? We will be throwing curveballs, and things will happen that will force us to think differently. There are a few phenomena happening, though, that kind of do play a little bit towards this question. First of all, people, we're increasingly living in cities. People want a good, clean, fun, healthy community. And that means things like more parks. It means that potentially we can start to convert some roads to green spaces. We're seeing that in cities ranging from Mexico to New York City even. And sometimes when we pedestrianize very kind of densely trafficked areas, we're surprised that the traffic improves around the area and obviously brings a lot more life back.
Mm-hmm.
Because look at Times Square, right, where it used to be just this bustling trafficked area of buses and taxis and cars, and nobody wanted to be there really. They sort of went there to take photographs and then got the hell out of there.
Yeah.
But today it's completely pedestrianized almost, and
Yep.
and there are cafes and when pre-pandemic, and I know post-pandemic, 24 hours a day it was building community. People were out and socializing and talking to each other. And so, so you see that more trend towards converting the environment away from the automobile and back to people. There's some really good research which I talk about in the book about cities that have converted their urban centers just to be pedestrianized, either 24 hours a day or for certain hours, and how it becomes transformational, how suddenly children start to play on the streets again, how families come out and have picnics and people meet each other, and it creates a sense of community and a place-making process. This is an emerging phenomena. The last point I wanted to make is this more kind of pushing the envelope a little bit on where things might be headed, is the idea of regenerative cities, right? Regenerative cities. And that really plays to Nur's question. A regenerative city is one that is very self-sustaining. It takes care of its energy, takes care of water. It grows products close to the city. So you got some urban farming. There's a lot of circular economy at play, which means we're recycling a lot, we're reusing things, trying not to waste a lot. And where we absolutely have to, then we're importing things, but we try to avoid that. There are some really nice experiments being done with this idea, either as standalone areas, in the Netherlands and some other areas, and also as parts of existing cities. So that gives us maybe a potential clue of where, depending on the cultural direction we're headed, there could be less of this, paving over paradise and making everything steel and concrete, and getting a little bit back to, green space and urban forests, and less traffic in places where we want people to be. We'll see. We'll track this, but there's some nice movements in that direction.
I see we're almost at time. I think we're just going to run a few minutes late. I did wanted to get to another question because I think it's a theme of a couple of these questions. Bill James asked a good question about how we get cities to think about metrics and data. One of the things I think you certainly are well versed in, and this again goes to the cultural question. You're right to say that data can build trust when it's made available, but it can also create transparency where some may not want that transparency. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit just about how you were able to, or how you've seen cities kind of make that breakthrough to say that we can actually trust each other with this information, and we can actually trust the public with it as well.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for asking, and thanks for the attendee bringing that up. When I joined public service, I came with that data mindset, and I really felt that the community and all sorts of stakeholders should be able to have easy access to our data. And we had one of the more or most contemporary open government strategies of any small to medium city, probably in the world. We were one of the first to do something called open data by default, which was a big deal at the time back in approximately 2013. That meant that any data that we would collect would automatically be made available, assuming it wasn't private or regulated, which are, you know, some exceptions. And this can make people uncomfortable, to your point. I'll use an expression that Jim Keen said to me in our conversations about, you know, rapidly opening up data. He says, you know, when you dance with a bear, you know, be prepared to finish the dance. You know, and you know, it's a fascinating little story. You know, there are consequences to those decisions, and people get, you know, there's almost only an upside to the consumer side, to the constituent, but there could be challenges to the provider. You know, first of all, you better make sure the data is good.
Yeah.
I think that's number one, right? There's nothing worse than making data available and somebody in your community points out that this is wrong and garbage. You know, it could be as risky as data related to budgets or public safety. But I think it is a cultural thing. I think governments have been inclined a little bit to worry too much, right? That in the wrong hands or exposing too much information without people understanding it could create issues. I'm a person, and this is going to be a personal answer. I err on that side. I think we should make it available, even with the risks. You know, I'm a huge advocate for privacy. Let me be real strict about that. I'm a huge advocate for managing surveillance and eliminating it where it's totally unnecessary and improper. But where the data is useful and well understood, and we should provide, by the way, metadata. And what I mean by that is help people understand the data. So data for data. That will help with reducing risk. But I mean, maybe my final point here is you won't entirely ever eliminate risk in anything. And you can create always problems. But you got to figure out, is the upside, does it outweigh it? And in my view, data transparency, data use, open data, open government, the upsides outweigh those potential issues.
Well, I can't think of a better way to conclude this first part of the two-part webinar, Jonathan. It's been great to be with you. Again, the book is Smart Cities for Dummies. I would say, as we always do with our webinars here at the School of Public Policy, everyone who registered is going to get a link not only to the book, but also to this recording. And as we promote these themes and concepts, we ask you to share the video link widely. We're certainly going to do that here. I think this has been a really important conversation about a subject that is changing how we live together. And I think that, again, is what's so important about Jonathan's book, is that it's very human. It really is a very human book about what is often presented and conceived to be a very technological set of tools and concepts and processes. And so it's a great way, if you're just getting into it or want to learn more or want to engage the rest of your department or city government or council on these issues. It's a great way to do that. This, again, is the first of a two-part. We are going to gather back together again this time next week for part two in this webinar, when we're going to move from the discussion around these principles and technologies and cultures of smart cities to look specifically at the professional track, to look at the new array. Jonathan hinted at this in this last answer here, and talking about how data can actually be a source for economic development in a city. It can also be the source of a whole new set of careers that we're seeing here at the policy school, and Jonathan obviously has been directly engaged in. So if you know someone who's thinking about careers in this blend of private sector and public sector, these kinds of cross-sector careers, I invite you to let them know, and we'll send around the link again for that. Again, this time next week, we're going to be looking at the professional track in smart cities. And so, Jonathan, thank you again so much for this time. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you this time next week. Thanks.